Wonderful. Great. So again, a very warm welcome to everybody. Johan Burger is my name. Director of SAFMA, the Vice Chairman of SAFMA as well. We're kicking off on a very interesting discussion with the theme of the webinar today is navigating ESG in the facilities management process, an ESG and EPC webinar series. I invite you to post any questions you have on the Q&A portal as well. We'll pick up on those later. Each presenter, we've got two excellent speakers today, are going to be speaking for about 20 minutes each, and we'll have a 15 minutes Q&A session afterwards. I just want to introduce our first speaker, and I've been fortunate to meet her as well, Songa Dadisa. Songa is a trusted in sustainability entrepreneur who founded the Green Building Design Group. She's trusted advisor and global speaker on the green economy and business innovation concepts. She also has extensive experience in implementing sustainability strategies for business and government sectors, including the real estate sector in South Africa. Her work in the real estate sector includes using smart digital technologies to ensure monitoring, alarming, and ESG reporting tools to enable enhanced safety and risk management for real estate and manufacturing asset portfolios. She has been voted Sub-Saharan Africa's Energy Innovator of the Year by the Association of Energy Engineers in 2019. She currently serves as South African Real Estate Investment Trust Advisory Member, developing an ESG disclosure framework for South African Rates Association. Is part-time university lecturer, University of Cape Town. Professional qualification include economics degree, economics and applied maths majors, postgraduate in sustainable development and ESG. So, Songa, lovely, great to have you on. And if I could move to introduce Zadok as well, just briefly in terms of his bio as well. Zadok is one of the leading experts in measurement and verification and energy efficiency. Working in South Africa, he's highly experienced, having been in the field for almost a decade. He currently works as a consultant assisting South African corporate companies obtain tax incentives for grants for the capital investment projects. Thus far, he's worked on approvals of more than 2.5 billion tax allowances for a diverse range of clients. This was in September 2018. His focus has been on consulting advisory on tax incentives and grants related to resource efficiency, namely energy, water, and carbon. And there's a whole lot more than due to time that I won't go on. So a very warm welcome to both Sonia and Zadok. So Songa Dadisa, would you like to kick off, please, for about 20 minutes, and then we'll hand over to Zadok after that. Over to you, please, Songa.
Absolutely. Thank you, Johan, and thanks for this opportunity to engage the SAFMA members on the interesting subject of ESG. And once again, I did have the pleasure of engaging some of the SAFMA members that managed to attend the annual conference. I do have a presentation that I would like to share in just kicking off the discussion for today, which I will pop up just now. I don't know if you can see the presentation.
It's coming through, not yet.
Perfect.
There we go, all on. Thank you.
Go. All right. Yeah, just kicking off. Thanks, Johan, for that very humbling introduction for today's session. I'll really just, in terms of just making this as practical as possible. I know everyone is quite fatigued. We've been in and out of conferences all year. So one is just to set the scene in terms of what ESG is, and then really focus on the big opportunity that you as facilities managers sit with, and then we can start looking at some of the practical things that you can start thinking about, both mandatory as well as some of the voluntary things that as facilities managers. But I like to really call you guys as data keepers, because you sit with a whole lot of data, particularly building data within the ecosystem of building. Just briefly, as I get into my presentation, maybe a brief introduction in terms of our organization. I represent an organization which I founded. It's called Green Building Design Group. And as Johan had mentioned in the introduction, we do work with quite a number of REITs. REITs, for those that don't know, are real estate investment trusts. So they are companies that are typically listed on the JSE. They have to report on ESG, and I'll tell you what ESG is right now. They have to also report on things like sustainability, along with their integrated annual financial reporting. So we do quite work with a number of these entities in South Africa and across the African region. What we also do is, as much as we're developing strategies for these companies, but we also look to bring in technological capabilities so that they can measure and manage their own ongoing sustainability interventions. But we also do play a role with regards to green buildings. We'll also unpack that briefly in my presentation. In just terms of setting the scene, we talk about ESG. When we talk about SDGs, what are we talking about? And really, if there's one thing that you can remember from this slide, is that ESG stands for environment, social governance. And the best way to think about ESG is it's really a framework that I as an organization, I as a data keeper, as I had mentioned to you, if I'm a facilities manager, I as a data keeper or a manager, facilities manager, it's really a framework that I can use to manage the risks, the enterprise risks that my organization face, particularly from a sustainability perspective. And when we talk about sustainability, we're largely talking about, they'll always really refer you to the Sustainable Development Goals. And they can be quite cumbersome if you really want to talk about it globally. I mean, we're really talking about 17 sustainable development goals. And these are not applicable to all of us, right? As I think, as sitting here as facilities managers, as risk analysts, as property owners, I haven't checked who's in the room, but ultimately, one thing to walk away from is that from a sustainability perspective, if I own a building, I'm not going to be chasing all the sustainable development goals. I'm obviously going to be looking at the sustainable goals that are directly applicable to my particular facility. And then when I think about ESG, it's really a framework that I can use to manage the risks that I'm exposed to, and also I can use to report on the various sustainability metrics. I quite like this slide because what it does is, on the environment end, it looks at all the sustainable development goals that cater to the environment category. And then under social, it looks at all the sustainable development goals that particularly cater to the social metric. And then governance, particularly because it's important. Without governance, we can't run organizations. And then what it does on the third segment is that it looks at all the sustainable development goals that particularly cater to the governance metric. And that's it in broadly speaking. But now maybe coming back in terms of setting the scene, why are we doing this? Why should I be, as a facility manager or as a data keeper, as I like to refer to you guys, why should I be caring about this? Why does it matter? It's because buildings and facilities in which you guys operate, in which you guys manage, are one of the biggest problem from a global perspective. We certainly know that when particularly compared to other industries, buildings, particularly the operations of buildings, contribute up to 28% of global carbon emissions. So, which is why there's this big global drive now to particularly introduce efficiency measures in those buildings that we operate. Why? Because we want to reduce the carbon emissions. And how do the sustainability experts see this as, or rather, how do the sustainability experts, what measures do we think that we can really do or adopt in order to reduce? Well, one way we can do it is we can be extremely efficient, and then we can also bring in renewable energy, which why is now the global talk is around net zero carbon. And the best way to think about net zero carbon, if I'm saying I want my building to be net zero carbon, I basically want my building to be extremely energy efficient, and then I want to add in renewable energy. And I think we should also be encouraged by the fact that already we have 4 South African metropolitan cities, namely Cape Town. We also have eThekwini. We also have the city of Johannesburg and Tshwane, who've signed up to this challenge to say, we want our cities to be net zero carbon, particularly by 2030, because it aligns with the Sustainable Development targets of 2030. And how we want to do this, we want to introduce the policies in place. And what they've done is these 4 cities, they've gone and started writing building codes to incorporate net zero carbon, to particularly ensure that all the new buildings by 2030 are net zero carbon. However, we do know, we're saying we want to get net zero carbon. Largely, when we're talking about energy efficiency, we also have to talk about all the buildings which we have. And one of the strongest voices that's pushing for net zero carbon is the World Green Building Council. And what they've said is that, well, practically we can't get all new buildings to be net zero carbon 2030, but to get all the entire building stock, we're probably really thinking about a time frame of 2050. And how can we do this? Well, we can do it through, well, we need governance. We need a government that's very engaged, that's very well legislated, like in the case of the 4 South African cities that I mentioned. We also need to be ramping up our training and development efforts, because I can walk into many buildings today and I ask an FM, and you can correct me on this one, if I were to ask them what's net zero carbon, it could be that, most people have to think about it. So there's a big need to start thinking about training and education. And then one of the ways that in which particularly the World Green Building Council has said we can really achieve this is get the early adopters to be talking about certification. And we really, I think as a country, we should pride ourselves in the fact that we've got quite a strong, particularly a strong corporate sector that's adopted and embraced sustainability. As I mentioned before, I do work with some REITs, real estate investment trusts, companies that are listed on the JSE that are really committed to being sustainable and really committed particularly to ESG reporting. And then lastly, but not leastly, yes, get your building to be extremely energy efficient and renewable energy set, but really think about certifying it so that we can also track and measure as we go along. Right, so I hope everyone's with me. I've spoken a bit about really the building. Now I really want to narrow into your guys' sector, which is really the facilities management. And as I mentioned before, you guys as data keepers, you're largely dealing with big data in your facilities, right? And this is normally a very complex process because there are multiple sets of data that you're currently having to deal with. And the other thing is that you're normally working on multiple projects at a time. And then add to that, there's the inefficiencies that often come along with billing issues. If you're not tracking and measuring your water and energy, your usage, you will end up in wastages. So all these things add up to create a very complex environment and ultimately then create bottlenecks, but also really create a massive reporting challenge. So what we're saying is that, before I finish, what we're saying is that yes, one can really think about these complex problems, but can start to think of a system-based solution as opposed to trying to tackle them but piece by piece and so forth. And then add to that, we know, living in South Africa, I'm sure sitting right now, some of you sitting in this webinar, someone is experiencing load shedding somewhere in the corner of the country. I know Eskom is saying that this is what Eskom said, is I'm saying it in verbatim. They're saying that we should anticipate to see another round of load shedding we should pretty much see load shedding for the next few months. But I think one would be realistic and being conservative. That is really, we're talking about years here. I think those few months, I would change those months to really years, because one, we've got this aging infrastructure that we need to maintain in the country. And they're also decommissioning some plants. So there's a complex challenge that our state utility is facing. But I think also, I was part of the energy breakfast where Chris Yelland presented. I think one thing I won't reiterate what he said, but I think what he said was that you guys as facilities managers, you hold the power in terms of how you can navigate this process from an energy generation perspective and certainly from an energy efficiency perspective as well. So really walking out of this conversation, I want to be able to delve down in terms of how do we then navigate? How do we navigate the ESG reporting frameworks? What is there to understand about it? And I want you to at least leave here thinking about, okay, where's my starting point? And certainly I think technology is one way that can enable, certainly the policy aspect, but also in terms of the implementation aspect as well. And I'm sure Zadok will touch on the implementation and some of the technology enablement factors that he's bringing on his side. In terms of ESG regulations, we don't have a set ESG framework in the country. It's made up of different pieces of legislation. I think on the one end, we've got a voluntary process, as I mentioned before. I represent some listed entities. They all abide by the King Code on corporate governance, and that's great for them. But what about everybody else who's not listed? So those that are not listed have to almost start taking into account what's available. I know as FMs, you've got the ISO 41001 that is driving compliance in your sector. There is some talk of sustainability in there, but it's not quite clear. So what you're doing as specialists in your industry, you're obviously looking to people like ourselves, you're looking to the association to guide you on some of the legislations that you need to abide by. I mentioned when I spoke at the SAFMA conference in George, I mentioned that there's now a mandatory energy performance reporting legislation that the South African government has introduced, where there's actually a deadline of the 7th of December for all buildings to comply. Well, which we all know that on its own is created a complex process in one, because as I mentioned before, you're dealing with complex facilities. What happens when you have 100 buildings compared to when you have one building that you have to manage? So there's also those added challenges. But as I mentioned before, with every challenge, there is a solution. And then just lastly, before I move away from the regulation slide, is also the pending carbon tax. I think as a property sector, we're dealing with phase 1 of the carbon tax right now. So it's mostly the ones that are directly, so it's industries such as guys who release fugitive emissions, your really hardcore emitters of carbon that are particularly being affected by now. But as a real estate industry, phase 2, when phase 2 kicks in, which is after 2022, and I think Zadok will correct me on this, it's after 2024, sorry, after 2024, when phase 2 of the carbon tax reporting requirement applies to your industry, then you really have to start thinking about it. But as it will start impacting you, but it's certainly something that you need to be thinking about right now. And then obviously we also have the 10-funded XA regulations, which are obviously applicable to the new builds and the retrofits. So in essence, as we can see that the ESG as a component, a single component, does not have a set regulation unless if you're listed on the JSE. But if you're outside the listed company fold, these are some of the legislations that one has to be thinking about in terms of compliance. Going back to the EPCs, mentioned earlier that really if I was an FM, NF, which you guys are, as an FM, I really need to be thinking about the energy performance certificate as a means to start reporting on carbon. Because as we all know, for every kilowatt hour that's used, that's about 1 carbon. It's an equivalent to 1 carbon, 1 kilogram of carbon that gets emitted. So already, if I'm thinking about it that way, if I'm tracking and measuring my kilowatt usage, I can really start monitoring the overarching carbon reporting process. So basically, in terms of an EPC, for the guys that are impacted, if I'm a private sector building manager, greater than 2,000 square meter, office space, place of instruction, a university learning center, entertainment, public assembly, I need to be reporting an EPC. And then if I'm public, I'm managing a public facility that's greater than 1,000 square meter, I have to be delivering EPC. I see there's a typo in my slide. The deadline is the 7th of December. So it's literally next week. But really coming out of this, and really I want to implore everybody sitting here, those that obviously haven't been thinking about the EPCs at the stage, other than it being a legal requirement, really start thinking about it beyond the mandatory, which is really think about it as a way to benchmark your energy performance and as a segue into your carbon reporting and to start your ESG journey. So I think from my side, one thing I definitely want to leave you with, the property sector, out of all the sectors, is the one that sits with the least amount of interventions that have been reported.
Songa, sorry to interrupt there, but another 5 minutes. Is that fine?
That's
Thank you very much. Really
I'm
enjoying
literally
it.
done. I'm literally
No,
done.
that's
It's just to
super.
say,
No, another 5 minutes would be great. Thank you very much. Sorry to interject. Keep going. Keep going.
okay, fantastic. It's just to say here that as a sector, the property sector is really sitting with an opportunity. As I mentioned before, want to start monitoring my energy savings and start to and we can obviously use the EPCs to monitor the energy usage and benchmark your performance of your portfolio, particularly if you're sitting with a portfolio of buildings, and then really start to think this as a segue to lead me to my carbon and my ESG journey. And then coming back to the risks and lightly touch on the business case of ESG reporting, other than the EPCs being a legal requirement, I need to also be thinking about, okay, if I'm going to be measuring, the energy performance of my buildings, I can really start to think about what digital tools can I bring on board. Some entities are readily employing or deploying smart meters. And this is really one quick, easy way one can start bringing digital integration to their portfolio. And it also gives you ready, real-time access on your overarching utility portfolio. Always good to think about the fact that most smart meters that are available in the market can also be calibrated to ensure that you're reporting on your energy. Remember, I said the energy and waste and water. So when we think about utilities, we're largely talking about energy, water, and waste. It's all those, and your sewer, obviously, all those particular resources. So starting point is putting a smart meter. Second point is you build into your ESG reporting from your smart meters. And then very important point that never gets mentioned is using a scientific method called measurement and verification, which I'm sure Zadok will touch on, to independently assure your ESG report, but also to independently assure and measure your energy and water savings. And then lastly, but not least, we need to be educating our tenants because it's people that live in these buildings. Yes, you manage them, but you manage them on behalf of people. We need to be making sure that, we're following through with the continuous education. And there's an ROI to this. There is a return on investment. So you're not just doing and investing in all these projects. You're getting immediate ROIs along the way. I think that's me really the last slide, really the last punt around the ESG reporting process is to say that even above carbon management, it's really being able to communicate the ESG strategy, or rather the response to my enterprise's risk that I face as a facility to multiple stakeholder. And then when I say multiple stakeholder, it could be the shareholders, it could be the staff that work in the organization, it could be the potential investors, it could be your supply chain. These are really the multiple stakeholders that I'm talking about. And that is what the ESG reporting effectively enables us to be having that conversation around. And that's really a nutshell, the message that I came to share. I look forward to the questions and the answers, or rather the questions, and I'll give the answers. But yeah, thank you so much for your attention.
Songa, thank you very, very much indeed for that presentation. I appreciate it. There are your contact details, and this will be posted on the SAFMA website. We look forward to that. I liked your reference to facilities managers as data keepers. And perhaps we can have a discussion around that some point in time. Very pleased you're at that energy breakfast for the CEO's breakfast that SAFMA organized on the 26th of October with Chris Yelland at One Discovery Place, fantastic building as well. And we look forward to discussions around triple bottom line as well, and the sustainability. We've really got 2 questions that I've posted there. Thanks for keeping to your time as well. I'm now going to hand over to our next speaker. Zadok, please, if you could come on. And Zadok, if you, Linga, if you could present for about 20 minutes, I'll give you 5 minutes notice when we close the end. So thanks very much indeed again. Zadok, over to you.
Thank you a lot, Johan, and thank you, Songa, for your wonderful presentation. I hope I'm clear on that side. If I'm not, please just let me know so I don't ramble on. So this morning I want to talk about energy performance certificates for buildings and what comes beyond energy performance certificates for buildings. Songo has touched a bit on these topics. So Ulinga is a SANAS accredited measurement and verification. It's a SANAS accredited inspection body for the issuing of EPC certificates for buildings and the SANAS accredited measurement and verification inspection body to quantify energy savings and also water savings. We do work with quite a few clients and partners in the public sector and in the real estate sector and in the industrial sectors. And in terms of our services, we focus on issuing energy performance certificates, the Section 12 tax incentive, because that requires measurement and verification, and we're accredited for that. And then monitoring, measurement, and reporting through technology, so smart meters, IoT devices, and accompanying software. And then everything generally falls under measurement and verification, or let me say measurement and verification plays a role in everything. So the EPC, I think by this point, everybody is aware of the EPC. We all got a rude awakening of the EPCs coming, and I think most people found out around September the EPCs were here. The EPCs are codified under law. They're part of Section 19(1)(b) of the National Energy Act of 1998, and it requires the display of an energy performance certificate on buildings. These are public buildings and private buildings, as Songo mentioned, and the EPC certificate generally looks like this. It's similar, or let me say the rating scale is similar to what you get on your new fridge, new television, new washing machine, and so forth. At its heart, it is a measure of the energy efficiency of the building, whereby the measure of production is the floor area, the net floor area. The measure of consumption is the energy measured in kilowatt hours. The deadline is the 7th of December. Seneti will not be, or let me say the DMRE and Seneti will not be extending that deadline. They're advertising it. And once you have your EPC certificate, you renew it in 5 years. All buildings that have been retrofitted significantly over the last 2 years don't require an EPC on the 7th of December. However, the following year, those buildings that have been 3 years old or would have been 3 years past their retrofit, they would require it anyway. So it makes sense to still try and get your EPC certificate the following year. So the rating of the EPC, a lot of people ask what this rating means. So over here, if you'll see 200 kilowatt hours per meter squared for climate zone 1, which would be Johannesburg, the average is D. So 200 kilowatt hours per meter squared would be the energy performance. That energy performance would be compared to the reference energy performance for that particular region, and that is the value ER. So then your energy performance will be multiplied by these factors shown here on the left and on the right. And depending on where your energy performance falls, you would get an A, B, C, all the way to G, depending on where it falls. So here I'm just showing the performance scales and what it means. Currently, a question I encounter is, will there be a penalty or a G, or F, or E? No. So currently there is no requirement for you to be one of those grades. However, as Songo mentioned, the EPC falls within the environmental legislative framework of South Africa. So we do not know whether in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, there will be a requirement for building owners to meet a specific grade. However, if that does come up, I believe government will start with its own buildings. So it will most likely begin with the public sector buildings first, and then it will be rolled out to private buildings. But I speak under correction. That's just my opinion. So eligibility, there are generally four types of classes of buildings that are eligible. This class of buildings are listed in SAN Standard 10400 XB. XA was the old one, XB is the new one. So you have A1, which is entertainment and public assembly. That's theaters, conference venues, game centers, arcades. A2, theatrical and indoor sports, so movie theaters, gyms, sports centers. A3, places of instruction, so universities, colleges, schools. G and then G1, offices. So that's multi-story buildings or buildings within office parks that meet the criteria of being over 2,000 square meters if they're private and 1,000 square meters if they're public. When we do the EPC evaluation, we come to buildings and generally we look for exclusions. These are excluded under the legislation and under SANS 1544, which is the standard of how EPCs should be measured. And those exclusions are basement parking, car parks, storerooms, balconies. And then within these exclusions, we also look at security lights, street lights, landscaping lights, so that the building owner is not penalized for these particular exclusions. They are taken away. So the equation for calculating the EPC at its heart is kilowatt hours divided by meter squared multiplied by an annum, 1 year. So effectively, it's kilowatt hours over a year divided by meters, the net meter squared, minus these exclusions. So the exclusions do matter because they impact the meter squared and the kilowatt hours. So what the EPC means ultimately is if you are a rating E and you want to move to a D, you would have to implement some technology. You would have to implement retrofits. And this is specific to energy efficiency. So you have to implement energy efficiency interventions. Adding solar panels to your buildings will not make them more energy efficient. It just changes the source of energy. And with the EPC evaluation, in fact, we look at all the energy sources the building is using. So you don't get any allowances for having solar as far as efficiency goes, because efficiency looks at how effectively you're using energy. So for that, you need to pay for technology, and that means money and technology to move you from one rating to the next. The typical process for an EPC is you appoint an EPC inspection body. I think there are 9 of us now, and your project is registered on the National Building Energy Performance Register at SANEDI. However, at the moment, if you do appoint an inspection body, you don't have to register your building at SANEDI. But after the 7th of December, if you haven't contracted an inspection body to do your EPC for your buildings, you need to register it at SANEDI so that you don't incur a penalty. I believe the inspection bodies can also assist with that registration process. Then the inspection body comes out, carries out the inspection. So that it typically involves walking the building, identifying the energy sources, identifying the exclusions. And then after that, the inspection body compiles an inspection report, which is submitted to SANEDI for evaluation. Once SANEDI is happy with the inspection report and the numbers in there, it will issue the inspection body with a certificate number, and then the inspection body will issue the building owner with a certificate with that particular unique number. Then after 4 years, the building owner has to start thinking about getting the EPC done again so that it's ready by the 5th year. These timelines are a bit dated now because the deadline is only 3 weeks. It's almost just over 3 weeks away. But currently, it will probably take about 1 to 2 weeks to collect the data, prepare the report, submit it to SANEDI. SANEDI's turnaround period at the moment is around 2 days. Within 2 days, they'll be able to tell you whether the report is good enough and to issue a certificate number or not. Otherwise, you have to review the report again and submit it again. For buildings that don't have independent metering for their building, that will increase this particular timeline because you'll have to put in a meter to quantify the energy consumption, and then some modeling and calculations will have to be done to get the actual energy consumption, because the energy consumption is meant to be over a year. This is what the certificate looks like. You'll have the logo of the inspection body. Then you'll have the logo, you'll have the SANAS logo of the inspection body. Then you'll have the actual logo of the company over here, your rating over here, and then you'll have the scale over here showing you what your rating means. So EPCs, as Songa mentioned, are just the start of greening the building sector within South Africa. Government intends on setting an example, so their focus will be on greening their own buildings. I believe there is funding for that. So the EPCs effectively provide a baseline. For the public sector, as Songa mentioned, it should also, the private sector should also think of EPCs as the start of improving its energy efficiency, because an improved energy efficiency means lower energy costs, means lower emissions, and most likely, depending on how you implement your efficiency measures, you might even lower your water consumption. And beyond that, buildings at their heart are about people. Adults spend the majority of their waking lives in buildings. Adults interact in buildings, adults make connections, adults get married in buildings, and so forth. So people also care about how efficient buildings are, because if you look at people who rent buildings, it dictates how much they pay for utilities within that building. And utilities tend to be the majority of the costs in operating a building. So my perspective is that to move beyond EPCs, building owners who want to improve their rating and want to improve their efficiency need to perform an energy audit and come up with a baseline of where they currently are. The EPC can help with that because we collect energy data, occupancy data, and data on the net flow area. Then building owners, especially those who have building owners and operators who have multiple buildings they are managing, I believe it's necessary to have energy management strategy, and with that, have software that goes with it to help you effectively manage your utilities and manage your building. And then from those projects, I believe by implementing number one and number two, you'll be able to have an improved EPC rating, improved energy savings, improved consumption leading to energy savings, water savings, carbon emission savings, and ultimately performance improvements, which I believe as managers we're quite keen on. So I think from what I've heard and what I've seen, utilities, energy, and water do take up the majority.
Sadak, sorry to interrupt. Sorry, I really enjoyed it, your presentation, and Songa was absolutely great. If we were to say another 5 minutes, would that be okay? Would you be able to wrap up then?
Yes, it would be.
Just seen we got 7 questions already, so I'm sure they're going to come fast and furious after you finished. Thanks very much.
I just want to rush into the energy efficiency process.
Don't rush.
Okay, we want to step into the energy efficiency process. So it requires one to have an energy audit and a water audit done. So water efficiency and energy efficiency are sort of the same. And with that, you identify the demand of your facilities or whatever you're managing, identify the processes that are consuming energy, and then identify potential energy efficiency interventions, such as lights, changing the HVAC, low flow taps, you name it. And then with that, you need to have a baseline developed. So have a baseline, because this baseline will enable you to track and calculate the energy or water savings and to track whether the project which has been implemented is successful or not. If you bring in contractors, you definitely need a baseline because you'll be able to use that baseline to quantify the energy savings. A lot of facility owners run into problems with contractors because they don't have M&V in their processes, so they end up overpaying for poor performance. An example is you brought on a contractor and you signed an energy performance contract with them, an EPC, based on savings, but then COVID hits, the building seems to be saving energy, but actually all it is you're experiencing low productivity because no one is in the building. But because of the nature of the contract you signed, you have to pay half of that or 25 of that to the contractor. So then you design your project and procure a contractor, implement the project. After the implementation, you need to have M&V done again. So have a performance assessment done to quantify the energy savings from an adjusted baseline. The baseline needs to be adjusted, so you're comparing apples to apples. So you're comparing the operating conditions before the implementation of the project to after the implementation of the project. That takes out things such as being shut down for COVID or being shut down for maintenance. Then pay the contractor, and if you combine all the savings for all your buildings together, you can also apply for the Section 12 tax incentive. And if you've already done the M&V, that makes it much more easier. The Section 12 tax incentive is at 95 cents per kilowatt hour of energy saved, and that's energy in any form. Then renewables. I believe, or let me say, you shouldn't implement you shouldn't implement renewable energy solutions without energy efficiency solutions. You need to first carry out energy efficiency initiatives to lower your demand, and then you design your renewable system for that new low demand. Saves you money and it's just efficient. Then you go through the same thing, project design and procurement, project implementation, and then you want to quantify and want to monitor that your renewable system is actually saving you money. And ultimately, I believe you should implement a utility management system. This is something you might have seen at the SAFMA conference in Cape Town, but as I said, the framework that we have, the MMR framework and the SAMS system for reporting and tracking your utility usage. So you have monitoring, where you have a policy of how you will monitor and report on your utilities. You have equipment for the measurement, and then you have software that comes with a dashboard to actually report on your energy, water, carbon emissions, ESG performance to help with your billing. We've got the system at Ulinga, and what we look at is tenant management and engagement. So it allows tenants to engage with a building operator and manage it directly. Resource monitoring and reporting, billing on one platform for all your utilities, including waste and refuse, and then budgeting and forecasting. So this is the beauty of having software systems that will help you manage your facilities better. I believe some of you already do employ software systems. Here I've presented the bigger picture, where you've got ESG on one side, you've got EPC and carbon tax compliance that building owners and operators have to deal with, utility management, and the Section 12 all tax incentive. All of that can be covered in a monitoring, measurement, and reporting strategy. I think that's the end of my presentation.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Zadok, thank you for the great presentation. And Songa, thank you very much indeed as well. We're ready on to question and answer session. We've got 13 Q&A lined up. So can we kick off, please? And I'll try and direct this to you, Songa, and to you, Zadok.
Yeah.
And between the two of you, you can then see we can answer. If we don't get through all the questions and answer, I hope we will. I'm going to go through quite quickly, try and handle this best we can. Then we'll always come back and we'll try and post these on via and emails. But first one, Kamatsu Jaka, how is the social and governance approached and embedded in addition to reduction of usage? Over to you, Soha, if you'd like to answer that one, please, Songa.
Yes, thanks, Johan. And an excellent question. This comes up a lot. I think the best way to think about this is that with governance, with the G of ESG, it's the people that make the decisions. Who make the decisions? It's the managers, it's the shareholders. And they also have a responsibility to provide oversight on all these projects, right? All these climate mitigation projects. Now, on the other hand, we've got the social. Social is the people. And I mentioned earlier, it's the people that work in the company, but it's also largely all the people that have to engage with the aspects of sustainability. So they all matter and they can all be embedded in the reporting. Thanks
very much. All right, good. Thank you for that. Right, Amanda Rossi is asking a question on EPC certificates. Is there a threshold where the building needs to be in terms of rating? If the building rates the worst grading, what then? This is over to you, please, Zadok, if you'd like to pick up that one, please.
I covered this in my presentation.
Right.
You're not mandated to have any rating as long as you have a rating. So currently you're required to have a rating, but you're not mandated to have a specific rating.
Thank you very much. Right. We're moving on. Mandla has asked, hi, are the presentations going to be uploaded on the SAFMA's website or shared with the attendees here? Yes, definitely uploaded on the SAFMA's website. I could answer that. And Marianne's also posted that on the chat session as well. So thanks for that question. Bongani Kazakoni has answered, legislation refers to dominant occupation. Will a cinema, for example, inside a mall be required to have an EPC, even though it is not a dominant occupancy on the earth or let-in area? Zadok, if we could refer that to you, please.
I think there's a bit of confusion around this, even at Seneti itself. Currently, I would say if it's not the dominant occupancy and it's not a separate part of the building, then no.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much.
When we say dominant, we're looking at something like a 9 to 10% split. If that cinema takes up 10% of the net floor area, then it needs to be quantified.
Right. Thank you. Moving along, Gustav Pistorius, where do hospitals and clinics fit into the eligibility scale, please? Zara, can you pick up on that question?
So hospitals are not eligible for the EPC right now. As you saw, those four classes of buildings, hospitals don't fall in any of those four.
All right,
But maybe
thank you very much.
as an addition, consulting
Yes.
rooms though. Consulting, if you
Oh,
have
yeah,
consulting.
so hospitals that have consulting rooms, the consulting rooms are seen as offices. So
Okay.
again, we look at the dominant occupancy. If the occupancy, the consulting rooms are composed more than 10% of the hospital's net floor area, then they should consider an EPC or at least have it evaluated.
Great. Thanks very much for that. Treaty Trust Scott, question. Afternoon. I have one question. If a company leases buildings, where and with whom does legal liability rest, the tenant or landlord, as well as cost implications to ensure compliance? Zadok, is that a question you'd be able to answer?
So,
please come in.
primarily, if you're leasing the building, I would say you should really push to get your landlord to get the EPC. However, when government comes to you, it will also look at the accounting officer of the person leasing the building and to ask them where the EPC is. So there's a responsibility on both ends, especially if you're leasing the entire building. If you're leasing a portion of the building, you don't have to worry. But if you're leasing the entire building, you also carry responsibility. This was told to the municipality specifically that they were liable for the buildings that they were leasing, that they needed to also make sure that they were EPC'd. So the first step would be to push it to the owner of the building, but you also have to make sure that you cover yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Right. Songo, you don't want to add anything? We covered on that side. Just come in.
No, that's just to say the onus is always the when they talk about the building regulation is the onus is always on the building owner. So the buck stops with them. Yeah,
absolutely. Very applicable to REITs as well. Yeah. Okay. Diane Townsend, will government schools also have to comply to EPC? Sadako Songa.
Yes. All schools, private and public, need to comply. All buildings, private and public, need to comply, depending on their net floor area.
Right.
The proviso obviously being the net floor area greater than 1,000 square meter mustn't have undergone any major refurbishments in the past 2 years.
Great. Thank you for that. Gosh. All right. This next one from Vian Nell is quite a long one, so I'm going to read through it, try to summarize it. Thinking of EPCs, currently very few companies have been registered to conduct audits on EPCs and have their SANEDI issued number for the certificates. Can building managers, tenants decide to start the prep and the data collection, verification, and compilation internally through a facility management organization with knowledge and the know-how to conduct EPCs and look for certification body to conduct the final audit? Songa, Zadok?
So the certification body, the accredited body does need to come out for the inspection, number one. The building owner, facility manager cannot prepare their own inspection process, report, because the SANAS accreditation process is actually mandated under law, under the SANAS Act. And us as inspectors, I'm actually accredited as a technical signatory, technical manager. We are liable for the results that we present. So we can't just sign off on anything without evaluating the data, without going outside. However, as far as the process is concerned, facility managers and building owners can accelerate the process and help a lot by collecting the data. So collecting the building plans, building certificates, and the energy consumption data before the inspector has to come out on site and put that together in an information pack for them.
Good. Goes back to Songa's point about data keepers. I like that sort of analogy and that link. And certainly as facilities managers, they have a lot of data at their fingertips. Okay, Doug, thanks very much for that. We're doing well with the questions, working our way through them. Ambrose Chikua. Hi, my name is Ambrose, a PhD candidate at the University of Johannesburg. I'm researching the topic of digital transition of FM South Africa using Industry 4.0 technologies with digital twins as the integration platform. Is the industry moving in this direction? I suppose he's referring to BIM, building information modeling. I don't know if Songa, if you or Zadok would like to pick up on that, or we can refer that question to another person.
Yeah, maybe just a comment on my side. I'm particularly working also in the building sector and green buildings. I can definitely say that the big contractors these days are easily using things like BIM, building information modeling.
Yes, they are.
But they're also incorporating that's in the design phase, but then also they're incorporating the likes of smart meters on the operational phase, right?
Correct.
To ensure that you have accuracy in measurement.
Correct. And so I'm going to just add to that BIM, we've had a presentation on it, goes through all the phases, right through from the design through to the operation phase as well. And what I'd just urge Ambrose to do is to write to SAFMA, send a mail through to Marianne. And if you are doing that research, let's send it out to the SAFMA members and let's see if we can assist. Lovely. Here's an anonymous attendee. If you are a block building, a block/building in Business Park, and each block/building is roughly 1,200 square meters, privately owned, do you require an EPC? Zadok, question for you, please.
If the building is privately owned and it's not 2,000 square meters, you do not require an EPC.
There we go. There we go. Thank you very much once in that. Right.
The EPC is given essentially for the building envelope, so it evaluates an individual building.
Right. Good. Okay, this is going to be an interesting question. Zadok, you're going to pick up on this, please, and then Songa to come through. Bongani Sikosani, is there regulation around the cost of EPCs? This varies a lot based on size of building, availability of data, etc., which makes it difficult for clients to know whether they are being charged competitively or not. Zadok, do you have an answer to that question, please?
So South Africa is in general a free market economy. So government will not mandate what people should charge for their services. The only thing government can do is to avoid, to stop companies from colluding each other. I believe we have very strict laws around that. So there isn't a specific cost for it, but from me to you, the general cost in industry is between 22,000 Rand to about 30,000 Rand, depending on the size of the building. On average, if someone charges you more than 30,000 Rand for your EPC, come chat to me.
Great, thanks for that, appreciate it. Right, we're moving through, we're on 12:57, still got a lot of participants there, some questions to get through. Mandla M, is Sanedi ready for the rollout and EPC implementation? Question mark. Have noted that the penalties or fine are a product of conducted inspections to the facilities across the country? Question mark. Zadok Songa, please, over to you too. You enjoying these questions?
Maybe I can comment. I can comment as an independent, not to say maybe. Well, the legislation is set, right?
Yeah.
But maybe where they need to strengthen up their efforts in setting up the National Energy Performance Register, because effectively when you finish the EPC, and I think Zadok can just complete, but when you get your EPC, you have to register it on the National Energy Performance Register. So maybe Zadok, you can answer. Do you think Sanedi is ready?
So what I can say is I'm not speaking on behalf of Sanedi, but as far as the legislation is concerned and implementing it, they are ready. As we sit, I believe less than 500 buildings have certificates issued. But Sanedi and the DMRE will argue that the legislation has been out since 2018 and people didn't do anything to comply. So they are ready, and eventually when they decide to give out fines, they will be ready. When it comes to going to check which buildings comply or not, they're most likely to employ enough professionals to at least do spot checks.
Okay, thanks very much for that. There we go. All right, Bonkley Shabaseri, I hope I'm pronouncing the names correctly. Please forgive me, I'm not. Hi, Zadok, you mentioned that solar panels doesn't reduce the energy usage. It is just another source of energy. Can you please touch more on this?
Okay, so solar panels are just a form of energy. You're taking energy that hits your solar panels in the form of heat and ultraviolet, and you're converting that into electrical energy that you use within your building. Energy efficiency is about how effectively you use the energy. So if you look at a production plant, for example, its efficiency will be kilowatt hours per ton. How much energy do you need to produce 1 ton? If we look at a building, efficiency is kilowatt hours per meter squared. How much energy do you need to heat up, to cool down 1 square meter of your building, and that energy can come from any source. So putting up your solar panels will reduce your operating costs potentially. I mean, after the payback period, to reduce your operating costs, meaning you pay less to the municipality for electricity, because I think the cost of solar now is cheaper than the cost of electricity. So it will reduce your operating costs, but won't necessarily reduce your energy consumption. To reduce your energy consumption, you need to become more energy efficient.
Thank you very much. Right. So we've got 19 questions. I've lost track of how many we've gone through already, but we're doing very well. We're on to 1 o'clock. Those who can, participants can stay on, please. And hopefully your questions will be answered the next, I think let's go for another 5 minutes if we can. So Manda, another question. Manda's been very busy this afternoon. So has Sanedi not made or communicated an extension on the 7th December 2020, I suppose 2022 date? Zadok, you must probably be best informed to answer that. Sorry.
So as of this morning, Sanedi was again advertising on LinkedIn that the deadline is the 7th of December. They haven't communicated to the inspection bodies, to anyone, that there will be an extension. So that hasn't happened. What has been told to me is that everybody has to comply. Those who've already contracted an EPC supplier don't have to worry. Those who haven't contracted an EPC supplier by the 7th need to register their building on the National Building Performance Register, the National Building Energy Performance Register. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much.
There won't be an extension. There will be a grace period if you've registered on the system.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks for that clarification. Appreciate this. Songa, this is for you, not leaving you out here. A lot of questions for Zadok, and both of you appreciate you coming in. Songa's mentioned here. Songa mentioned the starting point for ESG. Am I correct in saying that an environmental management system, I'd imagine ISO 14001, it's just 14001 yet, will be one of the measures to consider in addressing the impacts and starting your ESG philosophy? That was from Vionel. Songa, over to you, please.
I think certainly the E aspect. I remember I said ESG is not just the environment and carbon emissions. I know some of the engineers in the room might say, no, it should only be about E. I'm not pointing any fingers, but effectively, certainly when it comes to the E part, you just need a strong, definitive system that can accurately measure your carbon emissions. But also, as I mentioned before, you need an independent process. And I mentioned, and as I explained what M&V is, measurement and verification, to independently measure those carbon emissions.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Yes.
Assurance. Thanks very much. Good. Okay. Edwin Adams, question. Buildings constructed pre-2022, will they need to be compliant? Zadok, yes or no?
No.
No. Lovely. Good. Next question. Lusanda Arenzi, thank you. Thank you for these presentations. It's such an eye-opener. Our landlord has just started the process. At least now I have an insight. So thank you very much for that, Lusanda. Please, you could join us. Komatsu Jaka, has Sanedi released progress of issued EPCs versus total number of eligible buildings? How is that managed? And also, are building owners going to meet the deadline looking at the status quo? Zadok, brave to answer that.
I am basing this just on the certificates I've received back. So I just want to clarify again, I am not speaking on behalf of Sanedi. I don't have any authority to do so. I'm just basing it on my experience. There are approximately 200,000 buildings in the country that might be eligible. Out of those, less than 1,000 have EPCs. So just from my own personal knowledge, I'm not speaking on behalf of Sanedi or the DMRP.
Yeah, thank you very much. Some way to go.
I think maybe as a comment there is as data keepers and certainly the people in the room, one thing that should be clear is that there's an opportunity here, right? If we're to maybe register for an energy management course or register for a energy auditing course, I can actively go into the space, right?
Sure.
Just something to think about for the people in the webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you. You touched on that training and it's such an important aspect. And Zadok also mentioned ISO 50001 in his presentation. I mean, wonderful, lot more companies had to go for that. Thank you.
ISO 50001 is undergoing updates.
Yes.
Which the SABS has released.
Fantastic. Okay. Ambrose Chikewe says, thank you. Yonela Duchwa, I'm a facilities manager from a client side who's responsible for issuing the EPC. Question mark. Landlord, FM, or me? Question mark.
Legally, it will be the landlord. Then the landlord will call in the accountant and say, arrest this guy, not me, if you don't do it. And then the accountant will say, I sent it down to the facility manager to sort it out, and he didn't, so we'll both go to jail. So legally, it will be at the top, but in my experience, we always communicate and go back and forth with the facility manager. So the facility manager should take it upon themselves to quantify the net flow area, and this is not the GLA. This is as designed net flow area, and to then obtain the data that's necessary to get your EPC.
Great, thanks very much for that. Okay, and having said that, I was just playing around here and I lost my place, but hopefully I'll get it back. Zadok mentioned an average of 30K. Is this based on hourly rate or size of a building? Zadok, question for you.
The variation from 22,000 to 30K is based on the size of the building, and also based on where your building is. If your building is in the northwest or the Karoo, an inspection body is going to charge you a bit more to go there.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't want to go to the
There's
Karoo.
no people there.
You'd be surprised. Oh, goodness. Okay. Right. Last question, I think. Israel Mongamatsi. Do you know if anyone, question mark, association has approached the government to postpone the deadline of 7th of December, as this is not practically possible to comply? Israel.
Yeah, no, maybe I can jump in there.
Yeah.
Certainly industry associations, obviously the ones that are impacted. I know there's particularly publicly entities like SAFMA have engaged the government to just see if those members that can't particularly meet the deadline if there's an extension. So there have been industry associations that have reached out. And some, obviously, some landlords that have said, look, we're not going to meet this deadline. You guys are not meeting this deadline.
They reached out all the way back in August, I think towards the end of August, and they received a resounding no.
Okay, no, all right. Okay, last two questions for those who can stand, and we've got time, and then we've covered all of them. Great, Songa, and I hope you got time, and Zadok, please, in your time. I must be eating into your lunchtime there, so my apologies, and really enjoyed this. From Mandla M, does registration to Sanedi required to be done by a SANSA accredited entity, SANSA? Zadok, to you, question? Yes, no?
The building owner can register the building by themselves, but they can also ask an inspection body they've contracted to register the buildings. Right. But you can do it yourself, contact, I'll just find out whether I'm allowed to share the emails, and then I'll pass it on to Marianne. Okay,
please do that, she can answer. Thank you. Last one we're going to take here, and then we work through about 24 questions via Nell. Will South Africa be considering EPCs for residential properties as well? Question mark. In the UK, for example, one cannot sell a property or dwelling without an EPC, but currently in South Africa, we're only looking at commercial buildings and plants, question mark. Zadok, for you, please, and Songa coming.
We cannot speak on behalf of government, but there hasn't been a lot of legislation for the residential sector. The residential sector, the way I see it, is being tackled through equipment standards. So SANEDI, the South African National Energy Development Institute, has been developing standards for equipment within the household, and they work with equipment suppliers and manufacturers to tell them, in South Africa, we're not going to accept a fridge that is less than a D or a C, that type of thing. So that's how they're handling the residential sector. But in terms of actual regulation, mandating EPCs for the residential sector, we haven't heard of anything in the pipeline.
Okay. Wonderful.
Just add in there, so the standard that Zadok's talking about is SANS 1544, which was actually developed through the South African Bureau of Standards, right? I can comment. There is talk of an EPC for residents, but I think we're looking at the next 4 to 5 years. Really, but for now, I think the government has got their hands full with the ones for commercial building owners.
Sure. Right. So a big thank you to everybody, all our participants who stayed on the line. A big thank you as well, and especially to our two presenters. Really enjoyed that, Songa Dadisa and Zadok Kalinga. Thanks so much again for your time, for your presentations, sharing that information with us. I think it's of huge interest, and I'm sure that we're going to be having more of these in the future. 7th of December deadline looms. Zadok, you've given some good advice there. So I'm sure that people will be taking it up. And I really enjoyed the comments about data collectors and imparting. There's a Frost and Sullivan study report which lists 40% of all CO2 emissions and more than 50% of our consumption, 35% of our waste production is from our buildings. So Songa really ties in very well with what you said. And certainly we're into some exciting times with the triple bottom line sustainability reporting. And I'm sure we're going to have another webinar sometime in the future in the new year. And we look forward to inviting you back to pick up on points. And we'll see where we are the 7th of December. Let's see what materializes. And let's see if there are any core challenges. And let's see from there what happens. But thank you again very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thanks again to all our participants. And enjoy the rest of your day. Appreciate it. All the best.
Bye.
Bye.
Keep well.
Cheers.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye then.